We will create this animated accordion component in React Native. The animation was created by using React Native Reanimated library, and the beauty of this animation is we are only using a single uShared value to animate multiple components. We will start by initializing the project, creating the accordion component, and animating the components. If you want to know how to animate the component real quick, please feel free to skip over. So let's do our first step, initialize the Expo project. We are going to use Expo TypeScript template, so let's go over to their documentation page. Expo TypeScript template. We use this link and let's execute this command. And here I am already at the project directory, so I'm gonna execute the command. So now let's try to install the application to the emulator by opening the terminal, and I'll type npx expo start. And now let's install the application by pressing A. As you can see, this is an empty project and we can start to install React Native Reanimated. So let's go to their official documentation. Since we are using Expo, let's execute this command. I'm gonna stop the server and execute the command. While waiting the command to finish, let's go to the next step of the installation. They said that we need to add React Native Reanimated plugin into our Babel config.js file. So here, let's add the plugin. The code lays under plugins array. So let's create one since we do not have any. Plugins, copy the code, hit save, and let's see the next step. So they want or they recommend us to restart the server. So let's copy the command. Now our initialization process is finished. We can go to the next step, which is to create the accordion component. For styling, I'm going with dark mode. So let's replace the background color to a darker one. Next, I'm going to remove the center alignment. And we are going to set the status bar style to light. And let's remove the text. Next, let's start with a view. Here we are building the heading component. So let's use text component. Initialize expo project. Let's add some padding. I'm gonna add a little bit of gap since it's too close to the status bar. Now let's make the text lighter. Let's increase the font size of the heading. Make it bold. And let's add a background color to the accordion container. Add padding. Add border radius. Since I want to be able to click the heading to do the collapse and expand animation, let's wrap the heading with touchable opacity. Now let's also wrap the content with view element. Now our goal is to hide the content. Since the first state of an accordion component usually collapsed, so let's hide the content. There are several ways to hide the content. We can use state, but in this case we just go with style or CSS way, which means there will be a trick here. So let's make the container of the content to absolute. This way, the accordion component doesn't count the content component as a part of its children, which means the height of the content is not included. So let's wrap the content with a view again, so that the absolute component is within this container. So in theory, this container is under our heading, but the content in this container, we can say that it doesn't exist, so it doesn't count the height of this component. So that is why the content moved back to the initial position. And now we want to hide the component. So let's do overflow hidden. in the parent container. Since we have padding to all the sides of the container, we also want to give the same gap to the absolute component. So let's do padding top 16. Now it's gone. That is a way to hide the content. And now the trick behind the animation is we are going to expand the height of the accordion component itself so that they can contain the content component itself. Since the overflows is hidden, we are going to make a sufficient space so that the component will show up. I can show you an example here. If we set the height to 100, as you can see, the overflow content is now visible since we increase the height. So let's work on animating the content component. Since you already know, if we increase the height of the container, it will allow the absolute component to be visible since we are using overflow hidden. So the idea is we are going to increase the height of the container equal to the height of the content. So the next step is to get the initial height of this absolute content. We can store the height into a variable. We can use useState, but in this case, useRef is more preferable since we do not need to re-render the component while we getting the initial height of the absolute component. So we do not want to use useState. Useref will save the value throughout re-render and it doesn't trigger the re-render. So let's create the useref to store our absolute component's height. I'm gonna name it content height. Useref, the type of the value is number and the initial value is 0. As you might know, we can get the height of a component, or in this case view component, by accessing onLayoutProp, and this prop gives us a parameter. I'm gonna call it event, and let's store the height of this component. I'm gonna call the useref content height current, assign value of the component's height. So let's do event dot native event dot layout dot height. This way we can have the initial height of the absolute component. To check if it works, we can do a console logging. So I'm gonna do it here, console.log content height current. It's safe. Let's restart our application. As you can see, as I press the heading, it will show us the initial height of the absolute component or the content. So let's animate the accordion's height to this value. So right now the height of the content is technically 0 because this view right here doesn't count the component inside it. So this component has 0 height. So that is why in the parent component also treat this view as no height. So we need to increase the height of the parent to the height of the content. So let's create a use shared value from reanimated to store the current height of the content. I'm gonna call it animated content height. Use shared value. The value is gonna be a number and the initial number is 0. So let's import the use shared value. Use shared value from React Native reanimated. Since we are going to modify the height of this view component, you want to change this component into animated one that we get from reanimated. Also, since we want to modify the style of this component, which is the height, we want to use animated style hook from reanimated also. So let's create content or animated content style. Use animated style, which gonna returns height, and the value of the height is animate content height dot value. Now we assign the style to this view, animated content style. And now what we want to happen is when we tap on the heading, we want to change the height of this value to the height that we have, to the height that we get from the initial content's height. So let's create a function here called toggle, and now we want to reassign the animated content height shared value to our desired height. And now we will start from the collapsed state, meaning the current height is 0. So if the content height is collapsed or the value is equal to 0, we want to animate it to the initial height of the content, which we stored the value in content height. So we can call with timing, which is a simple animation API that you can use from reanimated. It is a no-brainer API. All you want to do is to pass the desired value. So we pass content height dot current, and if the accordion is in expanded state, we want to collapse it back to 0 height. So we pass with timing again to 0. And let's execute this command in our heading component. I'm gonna refresh the application. Now we can see that we already finished to create animated accordion component with the help from React Native reanimated. As you can see, we only use a single use shared value to animate this component, and it's really simple and beautiful enough. And now the next step is to create the expanded and collapsed icon also to animate it. Since I do not have icon, and for simplicity, we are going to use an image. So let's find the icon. We want to use icon called saffron and pick one. I'm gonna download its image. So PNG, since we are on dark theme coloring, I'm gonna use white color. Let's export. I already renamed the icon to saffron.png and store it in our root project. And now we can insert it in our component. So let's call image from React Native, and the source is gonna be our saffron, which is saffron.png. Okay, now it's huge. We can reduce the width and the height maybe to 24, and we are going to make it flex direction row, and we want them to take the entire space available. So I'm gonna let the text to take the full width. And just to make sure, I want to align them center. Okay, so this is the first state of our accordion component. It's in collapse state. The content is hidden and the icon is facing to the right, and we want to change the icon facing to the top if it's in expanded state. We can do that by specifying this is the expanded state of our accordion component. So let's use our animated content height user value to also animate our icon, which we can use the same principle here. But first, since we are also animating the style prop from this image component, we want to use animated style hook, and we want to transform this into animated.image. And now we create the use animated style for our icon and call it animated icon style. Use animated style to return transform property to modify the rotate. So if the animated content height value is in collapse state or 0, we want the saffron to facing to the right. So we return 0 degree. Otherwise, we return minus 90 degree. And don't forget with the width timing API to animate this value. Oops. Minus 90 degree. Now let's use the animated icon style to our animated.image style. So we can remove this one and add another one. Hit save. Now if we tap, as you can see, this is a simple animation. We can do some adjustments here. If you notice that the animation is a little bit slow, maybe it's on from collapse to expand. So I'm gonna add a timing config. We can use duration to maybe 200. Yep, I think this is beautiful. As you can see here, we are only using a single user value to animate the content of the accordion, also the icon of the heading component. We do not use any useState here so that we do not trigger any re-render. And now, a single accordion component might not reflecting the real world scenario. So we are going to create a list of accordion component with different content height to see if our work is working. I create a data file to store a dummy list for our flat list to render. It consists of 3 properties: ID, heading, and content. So let's go back to our app.tsx file. Since I want to use this entry file to our list, I want to move all of this component into a new file. So let's create a new file called accordion.tsx. Just gonna copy paste all of this and change the function name to accordion. And now we can safely remove all of this. Oh, okay, maybe not all of them. I still need the status bar, so yep. And remove this one. So let's go back to our accordion components. Since we still have a component for the screen, we want to remove it also. So we just left with our accordion component. We might want to use the styles later, but we can delete it now. I think that is all. So go back to our app.tsx. Let's do flat list from React Native. Pass the data from our data, and let's render the item. We can get the item from the render item, and let's return our accordion component. Hit save. Okay, so there is a duplicated key. Forget to change. Okay, should be fine now. And now I want to add gap between the item. So let's do item separator component, which returns a React node. This time we're going to use view with a gap. Style, adding vertical, maybe 4 or 8. We have to refresh our application because there was a duplicated key, but now it's fine. And now let's extract all of the hard-coded value in our accordion to a prop. I'm gonna call it props, interface props. We want to receive heading, just a string, also contain also a string. Content heading. Now replace the heading to the real heading props, and content also content from props. Go back to our app.tsx. We have to pass props, item.content, and item.heading. Hit save. Yep, it's all good right now. Okay, so maybe the heading is a little bit long. I'm gonna modify it. I am going to remove component. Yep, that is better. Now if we tap on one of them, it's animated beautifully with no flaws. It persists all of the padding, all of the gap accordingly across the list. And that is all to create animated accordion component in React Native with the help from just a single useShared value from React Native Reanimated. And now is the time to refactor our code. So let's start with the app.tsx itself. Since the item separator component doesn't rely on anything inside of the app function, we can create another function. We can call it item separator component, which return this view. So I can call this function here. Awesome. Now let's head to our accordion. There is a lot going on here and we can do it one by one. At first, maybe the easiest one is the styling. So let's move all of them to our style sheet variable. So let's start with this. We can call it container paste. I want to hide the terminal for now. Oops, we have to give it a name. So container. And what do we have here? Okay, the heading container, styles container for the heading, container for the heading, and then the text of the heading, styles.text heading, text heading, and then the image or the icon. So I can say styles.icon, icon styles, awesome, and our absolute content component, we can say styles.absolute content or content absolute, content absolute. I think that is all. Okay, so we miss one. Can say text content, text content. Okay, save. Nothing's changed, which is great. And now I want to move this inline function to an outer function. Here we can say maybe on layout or on content. Okay, maybe on layout is just fine. The goal is to move the function to the outside of the JSX component. So I can say function on layout, which gonna receive event stuff. Oops, event, and the type of the event, we get it from this name, layout change event. Layout change event. Okay, wrong name. Yep, that is awesome. As you can see, our app is still working beautifully. That is how I create an animated accordion component